So we are going to start first with the, just a pure knowledge, and then break test we'll leave at the end. So guys, again, those people that want to record, please do so. Your phone's here or set it there. Hopefully you can hear it there as well. Okay, yeah, you can put on the desk. You can put anyway, guys. Anyway, because that will help you. Again, you will save so much time, guys. You can spend the time with the family, instead of studying all the time. Because just put it over. While driving, guys, home, you can listen to me. While driving here, you can listen to me. So I heard on the average people commute half an hour here. So half an hour here, half an hour back, that's an hour. Guess what? That's 1 extra hour you can spend with your loved ones at home. So it's good, and besides, you have the good information. So I'm waiting for you. Take your time. Just set it up so you have it right. Just one more person is setting his phone up, and then we'll go from there. Take it. I just want to make sure that you got it. Okay, cool. Yes? Okay. So let's start with the basic. On page 3, guys, I purposely put how the air brake system works, and then page 5, right? Thereafter, you have how to check brakes for conditions. Those are really basic things. Remember, you have air brake system on trucks. And by the way, remember, if someone tries to trick you and they ask you a question along the lines like, hey, where do you find a brake fluid reservoir? Or how you replace brake fluid? Guys, if you even think for a few seconds about it, you fail. Those are air brakes. So make sure that you are prepared for those trick questions, and just say simply they are air brakes. Or we even had a question like, would the air brakes work in space? Well, and they purposely don't say air brakes. They will say, would the brakes on the truck work in space? Well, if you say yes, you fail too, because there's no air in space, and those are air brakes. They just want to see if you are using your brains. But anyhow, let's move on. And to me, it's a funny question, but you would be surprised how many people fail that question. So,
Did people do that kind of
yeah,
question?
sometimes, yeah, they want to see if you use your brains. They can even help you, because not everybody knows, maybe physics that doesn't know much about, book knowledge about other things. You don't have to as a truck driver. We just have to know about the trucks, right? But so they might say, hey, you don't, just so you know, they will say like this. In space, you don't have air. Can air brakes work in space? And if you say yes, come on, right? It's like, if you don't have air, how they can work. But anyhow, let's move on. So how the air brake system works. Air compressor pumps the air through the air lines and air hoses into the air storage tanks. The governor controls when this air is being pumped there. The air storage tanks is where the compressed air is stored, and you have 2 of them, primary and secondary. Now, when you apply a service brake, brake chamber fills with air. That air forces push rod out. Push rod, like the name says, pushes slack adjuster. Slack adjuster turns S-cam shaft. S-cam shaft turns S-cam. S-cam, while turning, forces S-cam rollers apart, to which brake shoes and linings are attached. But only brake shoe linings create friction with brake drop, and that's what slows down and eventually stops the vehicle, that friction between brake shoe linings and brake drop. And then return spring, guys, returns brake shoes and linings to their original position when you release a service brake. Let's move on, let's move along. Let's talk about how to check brakes for conditions. Well, first of all, you have to understand simple concepts, and that will help you to remember those things. Checking brakes for conditions, where do you check them? Are you sitting inside the cabin in the safety of the cabin? No. You are going to be underneath the vehicle. Where else you are going to check, the brakes for conditions? And when you are underneath the vehicle every single time, prior to getting there underneath, you have to ensure that the truck is parked on a level ground. And then after making sure tractor parking terminal springers apply, switch is down, shock neutral, then you grab your keys, go outside and shock the wheels. That's exactly what you do in this situation as well. That would be how would you start the whole whole thing of checking brakes for conditions. And then when you're outside already, you look at those airlines. Make sure they are attached by a tension spring. And don't say attached, held by a tension spring, but the tension spring has to be basically well attached to those airlines. and holding them at least 18 inches from the ground. And inspect that tension spring, make sure there's a proper tension, it's not missing, basically not damaged and in good condition. If it's a steel one, also make sure it's not rusted through, not cracked or broken. But anyhow, let's move on. So now you inspect those airlines for conditions. No cuts, no bulges, not crimp, not leaking, not cracked, not dry rotted, not damaged, and in good condition. And they have to be well attached to the brake chambers. Now guys, brake chambers have to be well attached to the axles, right? So, you make sure that, they are well attached to the axles. Now, not leaking air. Again, that's air brake system. Brake chamber is a hollow big, big thing, and inside is air. Not leaking air. And then not missing parts, not missing clamps tight. And then as a big metal part, what do you say, guys? Most 99% of time. Not cracked, not welded, not bent, not rusted, through, no damage, good condition. Everything you finish with no damage, good condition. Now let's move on. So now, remember we just seconds ago, we talked how the air brake system worked, right? Read the whole book, guys, so then you will start finding parallels. You will start finding similarities between things. Like in this case, you'll mention all the same parts from brake chamber going on, because talking about how the air brake system works, remember, well, you mentioned brake chamber because you say when a service brake is applied, brake chamber fills with air. So you mentioned that brake chamber. Then you mentioned, hey, air inside of the brake chamber forces push rod out, right? And push rod pushes slack adjuster. So you mentioned all those things that I will mention in a second right now, because I'll be inspecting those things for conditions. Obviously, when you talk how the air brake system works, you just say it's a concept, what one thing does to another. You are not inspecting for conditions. But in this particular case, again, that's a page 5 in the books, guys, how to check brakes for conditions. You are checking for conditions, those parts. So I just mentioned, brake chamber. Fine. Now let's move on to push rod. Not cracked, not welded, not bent, not rusted, through, no damage, good condition. Counterpin connection with a slack adjuster. Slack adjuster, not cracked, welded, bent, well greased, no damage, good condition. S-cam shaft, the same. Not cracked, not welded, not bent, well greased, no damage, good condition. And then, guys, S-cam working properly, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted, through, no damage, good condition. And then, guys, S-cam rollers, not missing, not cracked, broken, rusted through, working properly, again, no damage, good condition. And then brake shoes, well attached. And guys, brake shoes, not missing altogether, and then not missing parts, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted through, no damage, good condition, working properly. Brake shoe linings are very thin. Remember, they are not metal. They are not metal. So I don't want to hear not rusted or something like this. Minimum thickness, 1/4 inch. That's very important to mention. You have to mention no grease, water, oil in the friction area between brake shoe linings, brake drum. Obviously not cracked, not missing, altogether no damage, good condition. So those things you mentioned about brake shoe linings. And then, guys, brake drum, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted, through, no damage, good condition. And return spring, guys, not missing, working properly, not cracked, broken, rusted, through, no damage, good condition. Those are the important things, guys, that you mentioned about, when you talk about checking brakes for conditions. Now let's move on. Let's talk about another huge concept, like hoses between tractor and trailer. You are going to be asked every single time about those things. And so forth, so far about how the air brake system works, how to check brakes for conditions. All those questions are being asked 100% of times. So again, hoses between tractor and trailer. You have 2 air hoses, guys, and you have electrical cable, which is encased in a hose. Now, all of them are held 6 to 12 inches from the catwalk by tension spring. Again, I just talked about how to check brakes for conditions, so you already know what to talk about the tension spring, right? Proper tension, not missing, no damage, good condition. You can say not cracked, broken, rusted through. Now let's talk also about the fact that those 2 air hoses electrical cable are connected to trailer couplers. If the trailer is not present, because let's say you drop it off, they are connected to dummy couplers of the tractor, so they are not swinging all over the place and getting stuck between the wheels again and ripped apart. They have to be stashed somewhere, and they are stashed. You attach them to dummy couplers of the tractor if the trailer is not present. Now, also would be nice adding that air hoses are connected to those couplers that I mentioned via glad hands. Because glad hands are the endings of air hoses. You have to see that. You have to picture that. If you still cannot grasp the concept, guys, go on YouTube, see it. Obviously, you have 20 hours of observation time, use it. You know, you can start going ASAP as soon as you sign up for the school. But anyhow, so let's move on. Let's talk about those air hoses first, maybe. You know, they're color coded. That's huge. One is red, one is blue. Why are they color coded? Because they do carry different lines. The red one is emergency. What? Supply. That's correct. You're paying attention. And the blue one is service. Excellent. There you go. So because they carry different lines, if you cross them, you're going to affect that trailer brakes in a negative way. The older trailers, and you know, I wrote in the book thoroughly for you, so you understand it really thoroughly, but it's enough for me to hear from you that say, hey, older trailers, the wheels will be free spinning because you don't have a spring brakes there, so you can take off, but when it's time to stop, the trailer won't have brakes, and the newer trailers will just, the wheels will lock up on you, basically, that's it. That's what I need to know. And now let's talk about conditions of those air hoses. No cuts, no bulges, not crimp, not leaking, not crack, not dry rotted, no damage, good condition. We'll stop here for a second. Because again, I want you to understand that, again, you have those parallels. That's why I tell you, read the whole book. Don't read portion by portion and try to memorize portion by portion. If you read the whole book, you will see the similarities. Again, we just talk about checking brakes for conditions, and we just talk about the airlines. Anytime you have some kind of a rubber hosing, it doesn't matter if inside is air or some kind of a fluid, let's say, you know, I don't know, power steering fluid or coolant. The same condition, no cuts, no bulges, not crimp, not leaking, not crack, not dry rotted, no damage, good condition. Look how simple it can be when you really think about it, when you actually try to logically learn something instead of blindly memorizing. Now, let's move on to glad hands. Those are the endings of air hoses. Well, glad hands could be made out of two different metals. You know, the older trucks, they have a cast iron ones, the newer one cast aluminum. Basically, with cast aluminum, we have one less thing to worry about, which is rusting. Cast aluminum or aluminum alloys, they don't rust. You know, but you still, doesn't matter which metal they are made out of, you still have to worry about, you know, hey, not cracks, you know, they cannot be broken or bent or leaking. On the inside of those glad hands, and also on the trailer couplers, you have a gasket seals or rubber seals. They cannot be missing. They have to be soft, pliable, not cracked, not dry rotted, basically not damaged and in good condition. And on the inside of those glad hands as well as on the trailer couplers, you don't want to have any debris there. Well, you know, that could interfere with the airflow. That's huge. No debris that can interfere with the airflow. And you can give examples. No grease, water, oil. Those are the most common ones. You know, you can say in the book I put sand, coins, you know, anything that could interfere with the airflow. No debris there. Now, let's move on to electrical cable. Electrical cable, no cuts, no corrosion, not wrangled, not worn, no damage, in good condition. Electrical plug, 7 prongs, not missing, not bent, not corroded, no damage, good condition. We are talking obviously prongs, that's a male, and that's the trailer coupler for the electrical cable. So now what plugs into the male, female, so the female is not in the book, but you can easily deduct that female is the ending of an electrical cable, and then you look at those holes, make sure they are not clogged. Anyhow, let's move on. Let's maybe talk about the back of the trailer. I like to start with the lights. Pleasure, morning. All the lights, just to get them out of the system, all the lights in the back are red in color, with the exception of license plate light, which is clear. They all have to be properly mounted, not cracked, broken, clean, visible, working properly. They break into two groups, marker lights and tail lights. I'll start with the marker light group. The marker light group, like the name says, they mark something. They mark the height and the width of the vehicle. The marker lights that mark the height of the vehicle, they are called clearance lights. They are in top corners of the trailer or the back of the truck, in top corners. And now guys, we're talking here about 13 feet 6 inches, that's maximum. Now the marker lights that mark the width of the vehicle, there are 3 bunched up in the middle, and the guys, they are called identification lights or ID lights for short. And we're talking here about 8 feet, and that's a minimum. In state of Illinois, you have 8.5 feet, that's max. Now let's move on to tail lights. taillights, at least 2 on each side. In the book I said sets, scratch the word sets. At least 2 on each side. Inside ones are called brake lights. They have 2 functions, stop and running. The outside ones are called turn signals. They have 3 functions. One of the turn signals functions a turn signal. Then you have 4-way emergency flashers and parking lights. So between the brake light and turn signal, you have 5 functions between them. And also remember, license plate light is a part of the taillight group as well. And in the book, guys, when you see the picture of the back of the trailer, scratch what the tail is, because it's bullshit. That's pasted from the DMV book. That's why on the other page, you actually have everything written. Everything that is written there overwrites the pictures. I see too many people looking at the pictures. See, if you study those pictures, that's bullshit. That's not what I said. But if you flip the page, here you have everything nicely written. So, you have to make, there are very few tiny little, things you have to correct in the book. And obviously you are here for 100 hours. You should know after the first couple hours, because I go over those things all the time, whether I test people or whether I go over the book like right now. But anyhow, let's move on. So now we mentioned all the lights in the back of the trailer. Let's talk about everything else. I would start with the doors. Why? That's the biggest part. By far, they take like 80-90% of all the space in the back, and you use them all the time because during unloading and loading, so why not to start with the doors? The doors, first of all, just basic things. You want to make sure they are not damaged, in good condition, so no holes, basic. And that's enough to be said about the doors, about the condition-wise. No holes, no damage, good condition. And then they have to be opening and closing properly before you take off. You have to make sure they are locked. And also doors hinges and latch handles have to be working properly, not missing. They cannot have missing parts. They cannot be cracked, broken, rusted through, and they cannot be damaged. They have to be in good condition. And then remember, also on the doors you have reflective DOT stickers or reflectors. They have to be present, not missing, clean and visible. They are going to, mark the vehicle at night. So that's very important. Let's move on. Now you have to have some kind of a structure. Keep going with the proper structure. Let's start at the top in the middle. What do you have at the top in the middle? You have door keepers. Make sure they are not missing, working properly, not cracked, broken, rusted, or not damaged, and in good condition. Locking bars, working properly, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted, or not damaged, good condition. Hold back chains, again, not missing, guys, with those things, because it's easy to lose them. Hold back chain can be missing, but working properly, not cracked, broken, rusted, or not damaged, good condition. And then, guys, you go down, you have a license plate before you get to DOT IC bumper license plate. Make sure it's well mounted, well attached, clean, visible, valid. And then DOT ICC bumper, extremely important. First things you should probably say is well attached, 18 inches from the ground. No more, no less. I don't want to hear here minimum, maximum, no. 18 inches on a dot from the ground. Has to be properly mounted. Why? Because its sole purpose, the only purpose, is to prevent vehicles from being trapped underneath the trailer. And then, guys, don't forget about just basic conditions, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted through, no damage, and it has to be in good condition with reflective DOT tape present, which has to be clean and visible. Now, you have to be prepared to answer the questions regarding those abbreviations, DOT or ICC. DOT, Department of Transportation, ICC, Interstate Commerce Commission. Let's move on. Mud flaps, well attached by the brackets, at least 4 inches from the ground. No ice or snow buildup on them, no damage, basically in good condition. That's all she wrote about the back of the trailer. Lights and everything else. Look how easy it can be. Let's move on. Let's talk about the wheels. Front and rear wheels. And that's on page 16, guys. That I remember. So, first of all, if someone says to a wheel, which they rarely do actually, but just remember, what is wheel? Common sense, guys. Real life. You don't have to be in trucking school. Wheel is a tire and a rim together, right? That's a wheel. If you say to someone, I lost the front wheel while I was driving 150 miles per hour and I survived, they know you lost the whole wheel rim and a tire, guys, right? But they usually will ask you about the separately. Tell me about the tire, tell me about the rim, front and rear. They obviously will specify. So now let's start with the front tire and then the rear tire, and then we'll go with rims. Well, structure. I personally like to start with tire pressure. So front tire, 90 to 100 psi tire pressure or to manufacturer specifications. The next thing I like to mention is minimum thread depth. 4/32 of an inch, in other words, 4/32, that's 1/8 of an inch. The next thing I like to say is that the front tires have to be virgin tires, which means cannot be recapped. That's a one thing, and that's for the new people. On page 16 was omitted. I forgot to put, regarding front tires. So those people that didn't put already in the book, please do so. The front tires have to be virgin tires. They cannot be recapped. So now let's move on. Well, you have to have the same kind, same size per axle, radial or bias ply. The next thing I like to mention that the tires cannot be touching anything. Now I'm talking about the front tires. That's a string axle, so it's not enough to say tires cannot be touching anything, but I have to say the tires cannot be touching anything, whether in straight line or turn left or right. Now I'm satisfied. Now let's move on. Well, there cannot be space between tire and rim. Valve stem not bent, not cracked, not leaking, kept tight, not missing, not damaged, and in good condition. The next thing I like to say, what I call cosmetics. In one breath, basically, I say no cuts, no bulges, not leaking fabric, not showing smooth surface, not damaged, good condition. So now, talking about the front tires, that's all she wrote. Now let's talk about the rear ones. And again, if you have structure, which you should, you will never forget anything. Notice, how I started the front tires with what? Tire pressure. Okay, the rear tires, I have the same structure, obviously. I never deviated from the structure, so I would start with the tire pressure. Is it different? Sure it is. Nevertheless, I do start with the tire pressure, 95 to 100 psi or to manufacturer specifications. The rear tires, minimum thread depth is different as well. Nevertheless, that's the second thing I like to mention. 2/32 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch. And guys, I will stop here for a second in that book so you understand. It's not like I forgot to mention how you check the tire pressure. You don't have to say it. You just have to know it. Because if someone asks you about front and rear tire, guys, and I put it there underneath the tire pressure, right? For both, that hey, you check it with tire pressure gauge or rubber mallet. You just have to know that. But when you talk about conditions of tires, you don't mention how you check it. You just talk about conditions. But be prepared to answer if someone says, well, how you check tire pressure? Okay, fine, then you know how. But anyhow, let's move on. So rear tires we are talking about. I already mentioned tire pressure, I already mentioned minimum thread depth. The third thing, what do I like to say is the third thing for me? Always I want to make sure that, I mentioned whether the tire has to be virgin tire, which means cannot be recapped, or can be recapped. Well, in this case, I'm talking about the rear tires, so I would say, hey, the rear tire can be recapped, and in this case, in the same breath, I say I will look for the thread separation. The next thing I like to say, the thing number 4, is same kind, same size per axle, radial or bias ply. The next thing I say, they cannot be touching anything. This is a rear tire. They're always straight, so I don't have to worry about saying straight. It's just no touching anything is sufficient. And then next thing I like to say, no space between tire and rim, and then valve stem not bent, not cracked, not leaking, kept tight, not missing, the whole valve stem not damaged, in good condition basically. And then cosmetics, no cuts, no bulges, no leaking, fabric not showing smooth surface, no damage, good condition. Now guys, the front one would be over, right? But the rear one, we have dual tires on ours, on the truck. So you have to address that fact, because yes, out there are super tires which are awesome. It's still fairly new technology, still fairly expensive, but guess what? Our trucks don't have it, and you have to answer the questions, pertaining to what we have on the lot, what you'll be testing on. So you would also mention nothing stuck between the rear tires and 3 inches distance, tire to tire. Now you would be done. Let's talk about the rims. Guys, rims, pretty simple, because You know, with tires, there are differences, as you notice, between front and rear ones. And maybe let's quickly recap that, because you might get a question like, hey, tell me the differences between front and rear tires. Well, you have to say, sir, ma'am, you know, there's a tire pressure difference, and then you have to say front one is 90 not to 100 psi to manufacturer specification, rear one is 95 to 100 to manufacturer specification. Sir, ma'am, you know, also you have a minimum thread depth difference, and then you say, you know, 4 30 of the inch, the rear one through 30 seconds. So you have to actually specify front this, rear this. Then the third difference, sir, ma'am, you have to say that, hey, front ones, they have to be virgin tires, which means cannot be recapped, while the rear ones, they could be recapped. You don't have to at this point say that you would look for a thread separation, because you're just talking about the differences. Virgin tires front, which means cannot be recapped, the rear ones could be recapped. And then fourth difference, front ones singles, the rear ones duals. I know that we have a super tires out there, our trucks don't have it, so it's irrelevant that some other trucks have super tires. Our trucks don't, so front one singles, rear one duals. And that will be the answer for, hey, tell me the differences between front and rear tires. Guys, let's move on though to the rims. Rims are much simpler because front and rear rims are basically the same. The only difference is, you know, if you look on the page like 16 there and 17, I wrote that the first 7 points are the same. The 8th one is different because, again, it pertains to the fact that they are dual. And we'll get to this, not missing spacers, blah, blah, blah. But we'll get to this in a second. So let's talk about the rims. First of all, what applies to front and rear rims altogether? Well, the big metal part, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted, through, no damage, good condition. Lug nuts tight, not missing, no damage, good condition. No rust streaks or shiny thread there, which could indicate looseness. No space between rim and a tire. Valve stem not bent, not cracked, not leaking. Cap tight, not missing, no damage, good condition. We start moving to the center. There's a hub. Hub has a hub seal. Some people call it axle seal. The same thing, hub seal, axle seal. But the point is, cannot be crack, leaking, you know, dry rotted, no damage, basically good condition. And then hub has its bolts, which should be tight, not missing, no damage, good condition. There are two different kinds of hubs. There's a hub that has a grease, in this case would be sealed. There's no hubcap. When you have a greased hub, it's just sealed. However, if you have a gear oil 80W90, yes, in this case you would have a hubcap on the hub. And cannot be missing, leaking, cracked, dry rotted, no damage, basically has to be in good condition. So now, that's all she wrote for the front rim. Had you been asked about the rear rim, yes, you would say all those things that I just mentioned, but then in addition, remember you have to think about the dual rim, and then you talk about, hey, no missing spacers, you just have to add, that's on older vehicles. On older vehicles you had spacers, so you have to make sure they're not missing, and also nothing stuck between the rims, and then you have to remember 3 numbers, 5 and 2 3s. Now, frame is the farthest. Think logically, you have to picture this. Frame is the farthest from the rim. So the distance between frame and rim would be 5 inches. Then suspension is much lower, right? You know, so suspension is 3 inches, suspension to rim, and rim to rim is 3 inches as well. So remember those 3 numbers. And that's it. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about suspensions now. Suspensions give you a hard time. I think page 18 is the first picture, if I remember. I'm not sure. I think so. But anyway, you have 4 pictures there. Why? Because, see, there are 2 different types of suspensions. Air suspensions and mechanical suspensions. Air suspension doesn't matter on what location. And by the way, what locations would that be? Well, the tractor has front and rear locations, so, you know, for suspension, and trailer has one. And what's up? So now, guys, you know, if you put air suspension, doesn't matter which location, is always the same. Mechanical differs. So you have 3 different mechanical suspensions you have to learn, and 1 air suspension. Can you help me and fill like the 6, 6, 16 and the hours you were here? You want to leave me for signatures because I'm right now going over the book. Just put 6, 6, and the time you were here. Anyhow, let's move on. So now, let's start with the front tractor mechanical. That's the first picture in the book. Notice you have 11 parts there. Out of those 11 parts, 10 are going to be always present in every mechanical suspension. You have to always say them in the exact order I'm saying. Those first 10 parts, that will be your blueprint. So, frame, bolted and cross members. That's 1. Spring hangers, another 1. Spring shackles, steel rubber bushings, leaf springs, C-clamps, axle, U-bolts, nuts, saddle. Those are your 10 parts. That is your blueprint. And then in front tractor mechanical, you also have 11 parts hydraulic shock absorber. That's the characteristic thing for the front mechanical of the tractor, the hydraulic shock absorber. Now, The second picture in the book, that's a tractor rear mechanical. Well, thank you so much. Tractor rear mechanical, first mention those 10 parts: frame bolted with cross members, spring hangers, spring shackles, steel and rubber bushings, leaf springs, pleasure, C-clamps, axle U-bolts not saddle, and then you have to add 5. Axle plate, right? Because finish that axle area. You just said axle U-bolts not saddle, right? Finish that axle area. Axle plate is right there. Then along leaf spring, there's a torque rod. Then you have extra leaf, auxiliary leaf spring, and 2 bearing plates. Guys, that's how easy it can be. Can you? Oh, you already filled that. Also, very nice. Really? Okay, thanks. Now, guys, so let's move on. Let's move on. That fourth picture in the book is a trailer mechanical. Now, again, the first 10 parts is your blueprint: frame, bolted cross members, spring hangers, spring shackles, steel rod bushings on both sides, all bunched up together, leaf springs, C-clamps, axle U-bolts not saddle. And now think about it. This is a trailer. It has 2 axles. So now finish what is around the axle plate. You also have to add 5 parts, by the way, so it's simple to remember. And then alongside of each axle, alongside of the leaf spring, there is a torque arm. On one side is fixed torque arm, and by another axle is adjustable torque arm. And then you have equalizer and stabilizer bar. So again, quickly, trailer mechanical. Frame bolted cross members, spring hangers, spring shackles, steel and rubber bushing, leaf spring, C-clamps, axle U-bolts not saddle, axle plate, fixed torque arm, adjustable torque arm, equalizer and stabilizer bar. Very, very simple. And that equalizer, guys, remember, because there are 2 axles, right? Those leaf springs converge together. Like when they meet, one axle leaf spring, another axle, they meet together. And equalizer is right there when they meet together, because when you put the load, when you load it up, it spreads the weight evenly on both axles, equalizes the pressure. So it's very easy to remember. And then stabilizer bar, even rhymes, equalizer, stabilizer bar, right? And stabilizer bar, it goes horizontally. You cannot see it in a 2D picture. It's like a cross member. But anyhow, let's move on to air suspension. That's the third picture in the book. Now, air suspension, what is characteristic thing for air suspension is bellows. Yeah, like airbags, bellows, they're called bellows. And they have their supports. Lower bellows supports, upper bellows supports. Right next to them is hydraulic shock absorber to help the suspension to go up and down. And there's a height control valve regulates, the height. So it's pretty cool. You can really remember easily many parts. And then, awesome, you are the best. And then, guys, you have to remember, like all suspensions, you have a frame bolted with cross members. All suspensions, guys, have axle U-bolts and nuts and steel rubber bushing. So when you think about it, it's not really that hard to learn that air suspensions after you learn already those mechanical suspensions. So let's start with a frame that is bolted with cross members. And like unlike mechanical suspensions, when on both sides you have the same things. Remember, you have like a spring hanger, spring shackles, steel rubber bushings. Well, with air on both sides you have different things. So again, frame bolted with cross members. I'll go on the side of the bracket. So there's a bracket there. You have a steel rubber bushings. You have an eye bolt. You have a control arm. You follow control arm. You get to the axle. Then you have U-bolts and nuts there. Around the axle you have axle seat, anchor plate. You keep following the control arm. You get to lower bellows supports. Then you have a bellows. Then you have an upper bellows supports. Then you have hydraulic shock absorber and height control valve. Again, you have to see it. Keep drawing those pictures. If you see it, you'll be smooth. It's very easy for you to do it. And my suggestion is, the order that I gave you those suspensions, when you read it, 1, frame, bolted cross member, draw it. Then, in this particular case, bracket, draw it. See the picture and draw it. Okay, doesn't have to be exactly like in the picture. You can just, it doesn't have to perfect, angles, because all the brackets are different depending on designs. There are so many different manufacturers, so many different trucks. Just the concept, you put like some kind of a rectangle. That will be your bracket. Put 2 dots inside of that bracket. There will be steel rubber bushings. Put a big circle. That will be eye bolt. Then control arm. You see how it goes in the picture. I mean, really, it's easy, guys, for you to, right? to do it. But you have to, while reading this from the book, draw it, and you will see, you will learn it so quickly. Anyhow, let's move on. Let's talk about maybe the little things, and then at the end we'll leave in cabin inspection and engine compartment. But right now I will go over like a fifth wheel, landing gear, etc., etc. So let's start with maybe fifth wheel. Has to be properly mounted, not missing parts. Well greased. No space between fifth wheel and apron of the trailer, which is the bottom part of the trailer. And then guys, locking jaws that are inside of that fifth wheel have to be secured around shank of the kingpin. And shank of the kingpin is the middle part of the kingpin. And now kingpin not bent, cracked, welded, rusted to no damage, good condition. Release arm not bent, cracked, welded, bent, rusted to no damage, good condition. Release arm has to be in lock position. And please guys, when I go over the book, I'm jumping all over. Don't keep looking, I'm looking at you. By the time you find it, I already finished. You haven't heard a word I said, see? Because you are concentrating on looking at the book for it. It's counterproductive. When I go over the book, listen to me. Forget about looking at the book. If you want to find, if I made a mistake, no, sorry. I haven't made a mistake in the year, so I won't probably. But anyhow, let's move on. Landing gear. 2 speeds, high and low. Going up and down smoothly and in unison. And in order to go up and down smoothly, it has to be well lubricated, well greased. And don't forget who is making this going up and down smoothly. You guys. You have that handle going up and down. Make sure that handle is secured in a bracket when you are done, so you don't lose it while driving. Make sure that sensors are not missing and no isers, no buildup on those sensors. Make sure that whole landing gear, not cracked, welded, bent, rusted through, is not damaged, good condition, guys. Those things you have to check. Now, let's move on to exhaust system. Exhaust system contains of 3 parts. Vertical stack, that's where the fumes go bye-bye. Then you have a muffler, an exhaust pipe. Here on this toy, you can see it. Vertical stack is this. Muffler is right there, and exhaust pipe goes right there underneath. So now, that exhaust pipe cannot be rubbing against fuel tanks. And then the whole exhaust system has to be well mounted by the brackets, bolts, clamps. Clamps cannot be missing, have to be tight. All those bolts and brackets cannot be missing. Basically, everything has to be not damaged, in good condition. No rust, no holes, no black spots or soot, no fume leaks, no carbon monoxide leaks, guys. Those are the basics about the exhaust system. Now let's talk about fuel tanks. Have to be well mounted by at least 2 straps with rubber paddings not missing. No holes, not leaking, kept tight, not missing, not leaking. On the inside of the cab you have rubber seal gaskets, soft plywood, not cracked, not dry rotted, basically no damage, in good condition. Also, the level of fuel in the fuel tank has to match what the fuel gauge shows you in the cabin, so you have to cross-reference the 2 always. And also you have to make sure, I still would mention, even talking about fuel tanks, that I would pay attention to the exhaust pipe not rubbing against the fuel tank. And that will be also wrote for the fuel tanks. Let's talk about the battery. The battery has to be well attached by the brackets. And then guys, not leaking, that's huge. The battery's cables, plus and minus, you cannot cross them, it will be big boom. No cuts, no corrosion, not wrangle, not worn, no damage, and in good condition basically. And then make sure those terminals on the battery, no rust there, no any kind of buildup. And then battery has to be shielded by the battery box, again, which should be properly mounted. Cannot have holes, cannot be rusted through, no damage, basically in good condition, because it has to protect that battery from the outside elements. And the lid cannot be missing, has to be well attached. There are hinges and latches there, right? So make sure they are not damaged and working properly, all that good stuff. You can talk forever, not rusted through, not cracked, broken, not missing parts, blah, 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 about those hinges and latches. But anyhow, the most important thing is concentrate on battery, and also concentrate on the fact that the battery has to be shielded by the box, which has to be in good condition and protect basically the battery from the elements. So no damage, good condition. Talking about the battery box, I think you should be fine. No holes, all that stuff, not rusted through. Anyhow, let's move on. Let's maybe talk about string system. String system, guys. You have to see it again, how everything is attached. So you have to go back and forth. If you see it, it's very easy. I will start the basic way with a string wheel. Always mention electrical and air horns, when you talk about string wheel. And then you have a string column shaft. Then you have universal joint, which is U-joint, and it's connected to string gearbox. Now, what else is connected to string gearbox? Well, you have a power string fluid reservoir because string gearbox needs fluid. And then also Pitman arm is connected to string gearbox. Now, between Pitman arm and drag link, there's a Cassonade cotter pin connection. And also on the other side of the drag link, between drag link and string ring knuckle is another Cassonade cotter pin connection. And then, when you're out of string ring knuckle, the spindle comes out to the outside. That's where the wheel is over it. So you don't see the spindle unless the wheel is taken off. But obviously, while you're performing pre-trip inspection, the wheel hopefully is where it's supposed to be, so you don't see the spindle. But when you talk to DMV people, you have to mention that spindle and just say, hey, you cannot see it, sir, man, because the wheel is over it. And then you also have from string ring knuckle, there are string arms coming out there. And then tie rod connects string arms on both sides. So when you turn string wheel left and right, the wheels turn in unison. Guys, again, that's pretty simple, I think. Let's move on. Let's talk about maybe in-cab inspection. Prior to performing in-cab inspection, you have to make sure tractor parking, trailer emergency spring base are applied, switches down, truck neutral. And guys, there are 5 areas, distinct areas you have to check. You have to inspect floor and pedals being 1, emergency equipment, that's the second one, string wheel, third one, gauges, 4th, and controls, 5th. Out of those 5, 3 of them require you to turn the engine on, which would be, if you check for the free play on a string wheel, there'll be 1. Gauges, another one, and controls, when you check, you have to have the engine on. And guys, after you turn the engine on, you look for unusual smells, sounds, vibrations. The key is unusual. You always have smells, sounds, vibrations, but you look for the unusual ones. Let's start maybe with the floor and pedals. Well, the floor has to be solid, basically, no damage, in good condition, no holes, no rust. You want to make sure that there's no grease or oil on the floor because you will spread it to the pedals. Basically, the floor has to be also clean, free of debris like cans, bottles, anything that could interfere with the operation of the pedals. And now talking about the pedals, all of them cannot be sticking to the floor. So applies to all of them. Cannot be sticking to the floor. Return springs should be working properly. Rubber padding cannot be missing, assuming that the pedal was designed to have rubber padding. No missing grooves. No grease, oil on the pedals. Those things that I just mentioned apply to all of them, which is clutch, foot brake, and accelerator pedal. But now, in addition to what I said, there are a couple things you have to add. For example, about clutch, 1 inch and a half of a free plate, true, and another one that if you want to depress it fully, it should go all the way to the floor. Accelerator pedal also should go all the way to the floor if you want to depress it fully. However, foot brake pedal, you have that distinct feel. It should not go all the way to the floor. If it does, there's a problem. You don't have air pressure. So you don't want the foot brake pedal go all the way to the floor. Now let's move on to emergency equipment, guys. Emergency equipment. Let's start with that basic one, fire extinguisher. Very important to have one, right? And has to be fully charged. Now, acceptable types of fire extinguishers are ABC or BC10. Look at the labels, guys, and we'll make it so much easier for you. I had no clue, really. And I consider myself very smart guy all my life, but because I never really cared for finding out what ABC stands for, BC stands throughout my life, I never knew till I came here. And then I look at that label, I said, oh, cool. That was the first time in my life that I read the label of the fire extinguisher, ever. And I look at this. A is good for trash, wood, and paper. B, liquids. And C, electrical equipment. See, now is so much easier for you to understand something, learn something if you understand something. So again, recap, fire extinguisher, fully charged, that's the main thing. Now ABC, BC10 types acceptable, well attached to the floor, tag up to date, safety pin in, that's it. Let's move on to 3 reflective triangles, which have to be well attached to the floor as well, not damaged, good condition. You have to have at least 3 spare fuses, each of them of different kind. If you do have electrical circuit breakers, there's no need for spare fuses. And also safety belts, guys, proper tension, latches working properly, not, you know, rips or cuts on them, basically no damage, good condition, guys. That's all she wrote about emergency equipment. Let's move on to steering wheel. You know, basic things. Start with the basic things. Free play we'll leave at the end. Well attached, not missing parts, not crack welded band, no damage, good condition. Electrical and air horns working properly. And then yes, let's talk about that free play. No more than 2 inches or 10 degrees of free play on a 20-inch steering wheel in diameter, guys. And now, how do you check that free play? Well, we already established that checking free play requires you to turn the engine on. Okay, so the engine has to be on. We are going to roll the driver's side window down. Remember, in trucks, when you talk about trucks, there's no left or right, which makes sense. Driver's side, passenger side. The same about the old cars, right? If I look at you, you're inside of the car, your left is my right if I'm in front of the hood and looking at you. So it depends on perspective. That's why I never open that can of worms and start saying left, right. They'll fail you on the spot. Is it driver's side or passenger side? So again, engine has to be on for free play check. You know, drop the driver's side window down, so roll it down, and then turn the steering wheel all the way to the left and, you know, stick your head through the window, look at that front left wheel. You are going to see the front end of it at this point. You mark the steering wheel with your left hand, just basically wrap around your left hand around, loosely though, loosely. Then you wrap around your right hand around steering wheel tightly, and that right hand has to be touching left hand. And then with the right hand, you start turning the steering wheel all the way to the right. Initially, there will be a hesitation. The wheel won't move. However, soon thereafter it starts moving. That's when you stop moving your right hand. And then between the space between the left hand and right hand, that's your free play. You cannot have more than 2 inches or 10 degrees. You know, obviously you're not going to measure degrees, but you can measure those 2 inches. Anyhow, and then if you want to do it the opposite, which you should, way you go all the way now, turn the steering wheel to the right. And now you're going to look at the same wheel. You're still looking, because that's the only wheel you can see anyway. You're going to look at that front left wheel, but this time you see the back of it. And you did the opposite. You go the other direction, the same concept. Now, let's talk about the gauges. Again, you have to know the numbers. For example, RPM gauge. First of all, you know, they might ask you, DMV, hey, what is RPM? What does RPM stand for? You better know. Revolutions per minute. It's called tachometer, or some people pronounce it tachometer. But the point is, you have to know the numbers. 600 to 900 RPMs. At idle, that's the key. Now, there's a water temperature top left, but again, familiarize yourself with the trucks that you'll be testing on. There are only 2 trucks, 2 different types of trucks we own at the yard. So it's not like we own 10 different types that, you know, to mess up with your head. There are only 2 different types. You'll be driving all those 2 different types, so you will know layout and everything else. But you need to know numbers. So water temperature gauge, guys, basically has to be normal range. Cannot be in the red. Then you have oil pressure gauge. Guys, there are 2 ranges to learn. At idle and operational. At idle is 5 to 20 psi's, and then operational 35-75. Again, you have to know what psi is. In this country, we measure pressure in pounds per square inch. So psi, pounds per square inch. You have to understand that, because you might be asked, as a matter, a few weeks ago someone was asked about it. Anyhow, let's move on. Voltmeter, 13 to 14 volts. Then you have air pressure gauges or gauge. Why did I say gauges or gauge? Well, we understand there are 2 air pressure, you know, air storage tanks, I'm sorry. And you have a primary and secondary. But guess what? You know, you might have 1 air pressure gauge, but then you have 2 needles because you have to account for those air storage tanks, primary, secondary. If you have 2 gauges, then you have 1 needle apiece. But what do we have to look for there? Well, you have to, first of all, when you start the engine, you have to start paying attention when the pressure is built to about 50 psi's. Why? Because you have to check from 50 to 90 psi's air pressure buildup rate. if, supposed to happen within 3 minutes. You have to make sure that the air compressor is working efficiently. And then the old numbers, you can say, sir, ma'am, in the old days, they check from 85 to 100 psi had to happen within 45 seconds. So you have to mention to those guys that, hey, the old, how they used to do in the old days. Because, a few months ago, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, DMV changed, to those 50 to 90 within 3 minutes. When I was a student, I was only learning about 85 to 100 within 45 seconds. So you have to mention both. And also mention that operational air pressure range is 100-125 psi, and that that the governor maintains it. Look how easy it is. We always say when we go over brake tests, see, that's why important is to read the whole book at the same time. Because you always say, I build the pressure to 100, 125, and you just blindly memorize this. Well, you have to know that it's operational range, pressure range, air pressure range. And also, at one point in the book at the beginning, I think on page 4, I wrote about governor, right? Cuts in at 100, cuts out at 125. Look how cool it is. So you know when the governor cuts in, cuts out. Because the governor is in charge of basically controlling when this air is being pumped and when the air compressor stops pumping the air. When it cuts in, it tells the air compressor, here, start pumping at 100. When the pressure gets to 125, the governor says, hey, stop pumping, cuts out. See, it's very easy. Now, if something happens to the governor, it's damage, the air pressure keeps building to 150 psi. And guys, at this point, safety relief valve opens up so there's no explosion, boom. And then safety relief valve closes at the latest at 100 psi. So it's pretty easy. Now, let's also don't forget the fuel gauge. Fuel gauge, you have to cross-reference what it shows with the level of fuel in the fuel tanks. Okay, anyhow, let's move on. Now let's talk about controls. You'll be asked by DMV in totally different way that I ask you here. Here controls, I just want you to understand basic controls. So it will be easier for you when you start driving at the yard, you will find where those controls are in the truck. But, during DMV tests, you'll be asked basically, hey, turn the marker lights on. Some trucks have one switch for all marker lights, and as you know, marker lights, those are clearance lights and identification lights. But some, there are like two switches, or one switch that goes halfway and turns, for example, only clearance lights, and then if you push it all the way, turns, also identification lights. So you better familiarize with yourselves with those trucks and the controls. Because you don't know the controls, automatic fail. Turn the, four-way emergency flashers, high beams, low beams, all that stuff, good stuff. Turn the signals, So anyhow, so let's just go over this, basic controls. See, I like to just, so I don't forget, because I always preach structure, so I don't forget those things. Right away, I would get out of my system everything to do with lights, right? Because so many of them, right? Controls for lights. So it's like just to get rid of them so I don't forget, so I don't miss anything. So I would start with the headlights. Controls for headlights, high and low beams, right? High beam, 500 feet, low beam, 250 feet. And then next, turn signals. Then those turn signals also have function, right? Four emergency flashers, I would make sure how to turn those flashers on. I would make sure, that marker lights, I know where the controls are. A dimmer switch, that's the light inside the cabin. And also fog lights I put in the book. Our trucks don't have fog lights, so don't worry about it. But most new trucks do have fog lights, even although. And then since I mentioned everything to do with lights, now I would kind of think about, okay, what else is outside of the truck? Because I'm imagining sitting behind the wheel, right? I'm playing with those controls, learning them. So I'm thinking, what is outside that I have a control over? The mirrors. The mirrors. And then right away I make connection, because they always like to, DMV likes to hear, when you talk about controls or, the in-cabin inspection, windows not obstructed. See, right away I mention, okay, windows not obstructed, sir, ma'am. And then windows, I make connection, windows, windshield. So I never forget controls associated with windshield. Well, what would that be? Well, windshield wipers, controls for windshield wipers, windshield washer fluid controls, also windshield defroster, right? And then I think defroster, is it cooling or heating? Heating. Oh, that reminds me to mention heating controls inside. You don't have AC, like by law you don't have to have a cooling, I mean newer trucks have them, but you definitely have to have heating controls so you don't freeze to that. And then it pokes me in my face. So, again, if I can picture myself sitting in front of the steering wheel, I will never forget electrical horn. And air horn is right by the ceiling. The newer trucks have integrated, not all of them, most of them. But, a couple years even older trucks, they have still separate air, horns and electrical. But if you mention electrical by association, you have to mention air. And, every time you talk about the controls, or every time you talk about the steering wheel, mention those two. Every time you talk about steering system, when you get to the steering wheel, mention those two as well. Don't forget, because you'll get like 10 deduction points, which is huge. Anyhow, let's talk about engine compartment inspection. Well, in engine compartment, guys, you also have 5 areas. So it's easy to remember, 5 in cabin, 5 in the engine compartment. Well, again, structure. To me, if someone asks me general question, what would you check there? I would start, I always start with the fluids. Then I say, but you can have your own structure. In this particular case, your structure, my structure, they can differ. Some things like, the suspensions, string system, obviously you cannot deviate. It has to be only my way or the highway. But in this case, you can have your own structure. I like to mention fluids first, then belts, then hoses, electrical wires, and then radiator. So let's talk about the fluids. I would make sure that I check for proper levels, make sure there are no leaks. Engine oil, transmission fluid, power steering fluid, coolant, windshield washer fluid. Then I'll check belts. With belts, huge thing is to make sure, besides conditions, which we'll get to in a second, but proper tension. No more than 3/4 of an inch of a free play. You don't want them to slip, right? And then, yes, conditions, no cuts, no dry rot, not cracked, no glazed donut look basically, no damage in good condition. And the most common ones are fan belt, alternator, and compressor belts. Make sure that you say common ones, don't say there are 3 belts, for example. That's not true. Could be 1 belt, uni belt, could be more belts like water pump belt. But anyway, let's move on to hoses. No cuts, no bulges, not crimp, no leaking, not crack, no dry rot, no damage, good condition. I'll stop here, there's more to say about them. But notice that, again, if you read the whole book, you find those parallels, comparisons. You compare things and there are like so many similarities. Because we talk about it, hoses between, to be exact, air hoses between tractor and trailer, same conditions. You talk about inspecting brakes for conditions, we talk about the airlines, the same conditions. And here we have hoses in the engine compartment, right? No cuts, no bulges, not crimp, no leaking, not crack, no dry rot, no damage, good condition. Yes, because of proximity of things in engine compartment, you have to say no touching anything hot or sharp, because they could. Is so many things bunch up together in engine compartment. And also well attached by the clamps, clamps have to be tight. Now we are done with it. Let's talk about the electrical wires. Again, well attached, not worn, not hanging, no cuts, no corrosion, no damage, basically in good condition, not touching anything hot or sharp. And then, guys, radiator and its fan, well attached, not missing parts, no damage, good condition, nothing obstructing their operation. And then in addition, in the book, there's a small mistake. I said in addition fan. Scratch the word fan, it doesn't even make sense. Put radiator instead. In addition, radiator, no holes, no leaking, cap tight, not missing, no leaking. On the inside of the cap, you have rubber seal, soft plow, not cracked, dry rot, no damage, good condition. That's all she wrote about engine compartment inspection, guys. Now, talking about, I think I mentioned, I'm trying to think if I mentioned everything. I think I mentioned everything. Let's quickly go to the front of the truck inspection. I'll skip most of the things, because if you read front of the truck inspection, it's so freaking easy. You read it once, you'll remember everything. I'll just put a stress on a couple things that, maybe, just maybe, it will take you a couple times to read two times versus one just to remember. So for example, windshield, guys, windshield. When you talk about the windshield, besides, obvious things like, no good visibility, right, clean, nothing obstructing the view, not cracked or broken, basically no damage, good condition, rubber seals not missing, not cracked, dry rotted, all that good stuff not missing. That's all nice and dandy. You also have to mention, which lots of people forget, no space between the windshield and windshield wiper blade. Because again, we always talk about good visibility. Truckers have really bad visibility on those trucks. So it's of utmost importance that, when you use those wipers, they really nicely clean that windshield. So there's no space between windshield and windshield wiper blades. And also, don't forget about those stickers. automatic fail. Driver's side, safety inspection sticker, guys. There's a huge expiration date. DMV might ask you, well, when is due for the next inspection? I would even, if you talk about the windshield, I would right away, or they ask you about which side is this sticker and that sticker, right away I would say when is due for next inspection. Read that expiration date. It'll be a month and a year. But anyway, and on the passenger side, you have insurance sticker. So that's something I wanted to mention. Also, when you talk about wipers, windshield wipers, make sure, because there's a windshield wiper arm and a blade. So blade is a rubber, so again, not missing, soft pliable, not cracked, not dry rotted. Again, I mentioned no space between the windshield wiper blade and windshield. And then windshield wiper arm, proper tension. Obviously, the whole windshield wiper not missing, and the arm not cracked, broken, if it's metal rusted through as well. Now, most of them are composite nowadays, so they don't rust. But anyway, let's talk also about in front. Like some people forget the mirrors, but they are simple. You have to understand they are flat and convex. Convex, those are angle ones that give you a little bit, better view. And again, cannot be loose, because after a while, when there are vibrations, and they are on trucks, they will shatter. So they cannot be loose. Make sure they are not loose, not cracked, broken, obviously not missing altogether. Well mounted, all that good stuff. And well adjusted. But to me, if you perform front or side of the truck inspection, how do you know if they are well adjusted? Unless you go inside the cabin and make sure you play with the controls, make sure you adjust them there. But you can mention to the DMV well adjusted, but right away, right thereafter, mention to the DMV that I would adjust them while being inside of the cabin and sitting in front of the steering wheel. What else? Yeah, everything else is self-explanatory. I'm just trying to think, certain things like grill, for example, besides, not missing, no damage, good condition, cracked, broken. Say nothing obstructing it, right? You don't want a dead squirrel being, spread on the grill, stuff like this. Obviously, bumper. Those are, I'm not even going to go over it. Those are easy things. You read it once, you remember. Now, on the side of the truck, guys, mention, again, if you really, someone was picky with you and was walking with you, right? There's one guy that likes to walk and say, tell me about front, okay, side, pay attention. Everything you see you would talk. Oh, I would see the front wheel. You want me, sir, to talk about that? I would inspect tire and a rim. He says, okay, I already asked you, don't talk about what else. You walk, you see the steps, okay, what do you say about the steps? Anytime there's something you step on, definitely no ice or snow buildup. On the mud flaps, we say it because when you have a snow and ice buildup, they are very like stones, basically, really heavy. And imagine if that disattaches itself, because you always think about the last wheel. Well, there are many wheels. What about some of the middle wheel, and it whacks and goes, hits brake chamber, destroys the brake chamber like this or something. So that's why we talk about those things, mud flaps, no ice or snow buildup. But when you talk about steps, you talk about catwalk, well, you'll be there all the time. You don't want to slip and kill yourself. So no ice or snow buildup. Obviously, all those things have to be well attached, well mounted, right? Not missing, not cracked, broken, rusted, all that good stuff. And then the doors, side doors. Very similar to the back doors, except you mention the back doors, you don't mention rubber seal. The side doors you have to mention rubber seal, also the window going up and down smoothly. But the basic things, doors have to be open and closing properly, they have to be locked before you take off. Make sure rubber seal is not missing, soft pliable, not cracked, dry rotted. Window going up and down smoothly. The whole door, no holes, no rust, saturation, no damage, good condition. Those are the basics. If you see some, depending on the design of the truck, some doors have, like this one, have the mirrors attached to them. Not all of them, because there's another mirror should be here, which is convex, should be like by the hood, and another one here flat. So the point is, you see mirror. Again, say what you see. It's very simple. That's about it. Let's move on to the brake test. The brake test, this is huge, and we'll talk, in this case, if you want, you can open on page 4, because on page 4 you have lots of things that I'll mention before going over brake test. And you will see how easy it is to decipher that. For example, in a thick font, you have service and spring, because it says 4 brakes. And please don't tell me I didn't explain to you straight truck combination in the book. If you see 4 brakes, you right away know that's a combination. Why? Because underneath those 4 brakes are broken into two groups, service and spring. So yeah, there are two different types of brakes, service and spring brakes. You already should know that, or kind, type is the same thing, two different words for the same thing. And you see under service you have a tractor and trailer brakes, right? And then under spring you have also tractor and trailer. So right away you know that those 4 brakes pertain to tractor and trailer. What is tractor and trailer? Combination vehicle. So if you take away the trailer, what you are stuck with? If you studied all that, you will see you are stuck with tractor service brake, which is a foot brake, and tractor parking spring brake, that's yellow now. So you have only 2 brakes on a tractor. On the trailer the same, you have a trailer service brake and trailer spring brake. 2. Now each of those brakes represents each type. On the tractor you have 1 service brake and 1 spring, so 2 different types on a tractor. On the trailer you have also 2 different types because each of those brakes represent different types, service and spring. When you combine those, you have 4 brakes, true, but you have only 2 types, service and spring. It doesn't matter if that's combination vehicle, you have only 2 types, service and spring. When you combine tractor and trailer, you have 2 service brakes because tractor has 1, trailer has 1, and you have 2 spring brakes, tractor has 1 and trailer has 1. But 2 types, remember that, don't make a mistake because I'll fail you on the dot, on the spot. Now, let's talk about maybe systems, brake systems. Well, the combination vehicle has 3, service, parking, and emergency. Straight truck does have emergency. How come? Well, you tell me how come. Why the straight truck doesn't have emergency? What is emergency? You look at the red knob. What is red knob? Trailer emergency spring brake. So, obviously if you don't have a trailer, you don't have emergency system. Because they are, working, you are using those systems when those brakes are applied. So service, one of the service brakes have to be applied to your service system, whether it's a tractor service trailer, or you have emergency, you have to be emergency one applied, or parking, right? So now let's talk about, for example, combination vehicles about service system. But it doesn't really matter, straight truck or a combination vehicle. What did I put under service system? That every brake test using service, right? Service brake uses service system. So you have to calculate, if I say in a combination vehicle, you have to know LG applied, those are engine off tests, right? So LG applied, by the way, straight truck combination vehicles, they all have 5 engine off to be performed. I'll get to this in a second. But LG applied would be 1, fan down 1, fan down 2, those are engine off tests. And on combination vehicle, you have also tractor service and trailer service brakes. So foot brake and hand brake respectively. So 5 brake tests use service system on combination vehicles. On a straight truck, you don't have a trailer, so you will have minus trailer service brake to be tested. So you have 4 of them. 4 brake tests use service system on straight truck. LV apply, fan down 1, fan down 2, and foot brake test. It's easy really to, when you start at page 4, is really easy to see that. Obviously you have to know the brake tests themselves. So that's why you read the whole book. But anyhow, let's talk about which ones do use parking system. Only 1. Tractor parking spring brake test uses parking. Which one uses emergency? Only 1. Trailer emergency spring brake. So now the 2 remaining ones are LX static. You explicitly say you don't touch any pedals, so you are not using service system. And you also, spring brakes with all engine off tests are released. So you're not using, parking or emergency systems because they are released. If they are applied, you are using. If they are not, you're not. And then, guys, slug adjuster test. That's another one. Engine off test. So spring brakes are released, parking and emergency, so you're not using them. And you are working underneath the vehicle, so you are not applying, obviously, service brakes. So that's how simple it can get. But anyhow, let's move on. So let's talk about, you already talked about brakes, how many straight truck has to, and you have to name them, that the straight truck is a tractor, right? So foot brake, that's a tractor service brake, and then tractor parking spring brake, trailer has 2, you mentioned them, hand brake, which is a trailer service brake, and trailer emergency spring brake, the red knob. And then when you combine them, you have 4 brakes, but you only have 2 types, so we already mentioned that as well. Now maybe let's go to engine on and off tests. Again, I already mentioned briefly, engine off tests, you have 5 of them. That doesn't matter if that's a straight truck or a combination vehicle, you have 5 of them. And they do not test brakes. That's the funny part. The brakes themselves, you test with the engine on. So straight trucks have 2 brakes. I already mentioned them just seconds ago. Combination vehicles, you also have to add additional 2 that come with a trailer, so you have 4 brakes. So on combination vehicle, you have 4 engine on tests to be performed. Again, you are testing brakes themselves. In this case, 2 brakes that belong to tractor to trailer. On a straight truck, you don't have a trailer, so you have only 2 engine on tests. You have to know those things like this. Don't even think for more than 2 seconds. And then 5 engine off tests, again, are designed to test everything but the brakes, and we'll go maybe over those engine off tests first. So there is, for example, air leak static test, is to ensure that air leak with spring brakes release is not too large for the safe operation of the vehicle. Right away you have to know, because lots of people forget to say spring brakes release. Well guys, this is the engine off test. Right away you should know air leak static. So spring brakes always will be released prior to performing the actual test. Air leak apply, very similar definition, is to ensure that air leak with spring brakes release and foot brake applied is not too large for the safe operation of the vehicle. Hence the name applied. That's the only difference. Both of them are performed with spring brakes release, but one of them is, hey, you don't touch on the pedals, but the other one, on the other hand, you have to apply firmly foot brake. Now, you also have a test called low air pressure warning device test. You're testing lower pressure warning device. Also known as fan down 1, also known as electrical. The question would be, Bart, why is it called fan down 1? Because, see, in order to check lower pressure warning device, if it works properly, you have to simulate air pressure loss. Because warning device just doesn't come at any point just for no reason. It comes out to warn you that you are losing air pressure. Those are air brakes on trucks. So you actually have to simulate air pressure loss. And in order to simulate air pressure loss, by the way, you have to build the pressure initially to 125 psi's before securing the truck in the first gear, and shutting the engine off, releasing the clutch, and doing all the other things. So, see, all those engine off tests, by the way, and that's a good to maybe mention, this is the good time, is that initially you have to build the pressure to 125 psi's to operational range. But then, why they're called engine off tests? Because eventually you shut the engine off and you perform the actual test with the engine being off. And now, remember I just seconds ago, I mentioned air leak static and apply. Well, think about it. If we check if the air loss is not too large for the, or air leak is not too large for the safe operation of the vehicle in both tests, how can you have any air leak if you don't even build the pressure? You come to the truck, you never start the engine, pressure is at 0. So how can you check the air pressure loss? See, everything is logical. But anyway, let's go back to a lower pressure warning device test, also known as fan down 1 and also known as electrical. So I already explained to you why it's called lower pressure warning device test, because you are testing lower pressure warning device. Why it's called fan down 1, because in order to simulate the air pressure loss, you have to keep fanning down on a foot brake. And then, why is it called electrical? Because the device is electrical. Prior to fanning down a foot brake, you have to turn ignition to on position to supply electricity to the circuit. So the lower pressure warning device can be powered. And then another test, engine off test, the fourth one that I want to mention is called spring brake pop-out test. Also known as fan down 2. So again, you simulate the air pressure loss here by fanning down a foot brake. Why is it called spring brake pop-out test? Well, see, the whole idea is here to ensure that the mechanism responsible for applying spring brakes works properly. So, while you are simulating air pressure loss by fanning down a foot brake, eventually those spring brakes will be applied by that mechanism. How they are applied? Well, they pop out, right? So they are released and they pop, pop, pop out. That's, by popping out, that means they are applying themselves. But anyhow, so, and the fifth test is called slack adjuster test. That's the fifth engine off test. And slack adjuster test is designed to ensure that there's a proper friction between brake shoe lining and a brake drum. Again, you probably never perform it. For the past 25 plus years, they have been self-adjusting, those slack adjusters. And even in the old days, the whole idea was that the mechanic's supposed to work on them, not you, to truck drivers anyway. But you have to know the steps for them. I never heard any of the DMV people ever told someone to perform it. Nevertheless, they do ask about it all the time, the steps, how to do it. So we have to learn that as well. So now, also I want you to know, forget about the slack adjuster test, but out of the 4 remaining engine off tests, which is air leak static, apply, fan down 1, fan down 2, which order would you perform them in real life? I will tell you one thing. Fan down 2 you would perform last, because you simulate the air pressure loss, the pressure goes to very low levels. Fan down 1 would be second to last, slightly higher. You simulate also air pressure loss, but slightly higher, 65, 60 range at this point. And then airlick, static, apply, doesn't matter which order. So both airlick, static and apply, you lose only tiny bit C, pressure, air pressure, so it's not a biggie. Either one is fine, first and second. But then fan down 1 would be third, and fan down 2 would be fourth. So now let's start with maybe airlick apply. Make sure tractor parking and trailer merge spring brakes apply. Again, applying means pulling towards yourself, and switch down. That's a splitter on this, by the gear shaft, and then neutral transmission. The shifter maybe in neutral. So now again, both spring brakes have to be applied. Call them by names. Yellow knob is for those people that record tractor parking spring brake. The red one is trailer merge spring brake. They have to be applied, which is pulling towards yourself. Switch down, chuck is in neutral. Now, we are performing airlick apply, so everybody knows. Depress the clutch, start the engine, wait for the pressure to be built to 100-125 psi range, after which you secure the first gear. Then you shut the engine off, release the clutch. Only now the truck is truly secure in the first gear, so you can safely release the tractor parking yellow knob and tractor emergency red knob, spring brakes. And now, because this is airlick test, doesn't matter if in this particular case I'm doing apply, but had I been doing airlick static, the same thing you say after you release spring brakes, which means you wait 10 to 15 seconds for the air pressure to stabilize, hissing noise needs to stop, air pressure gauge needles need to stop moving, guys. That's very important to say that. If you don't say that, you fail on the spot. Why? Because you will get false positive. Because the next things apply is that I would firstly apply a foot brake, and I would observe air pressure gauge needles, make sure that I do not lose more than 4 psi in 1 minute time for combination vehicles, no more than 3-4 straight trucks in that 1 minute time. Well, had that been airlick static, after waiting for that pressure to stabilize 10 to 15 seconds and hissing stop, air pressure gauge needles stop moving, I would just say I don't touch any pedals for the next minute while observing those air pressure gauges or gauge, and make sure I don't lose more than 3 psi for combination vehicles, no more than 2 for straight trucks. So as you notice, you observe that air pressure loss in that 1 minute. If you did not wait for that pressure to stabilize, you'll get false positive. You would think that you lost much more than you really lost, because that initial first 10-15 seconds, you hear that long psss, hissing noise. What do you think is that? You think that's your boss peeing in the bathroom? No. This is air filling the system. System is being filled with air. It goes through all the nooks and crannies. That's why it makes that hissing noise. So pressure is unstable for those initial 10 to 15 seconds. You have to wait for the pressure to stabilize. Anyhow, let's move on. So let's say someone told you after any of those tests to secure the vehicle. Well, what's the big deal? Securement is the same as the way you started each brake test. Make sure tractor parking, trailer merge spring brakes apply, switch is down, truck neutral. What's the big deal, right? Now, had someone told you to transition to, for example, fan down 1, which is lower pressure warning device, that's also known as electrical. Well, you have to know all those names for the test, by the way, because you will be asked for that many times. Also, because it will help you to solve the puzzle. So now don't forget to turn ignition to on position. See, if you know that it's known also as electrical, you know that you have to supply electricity to the circuit, that the lower pressure warning device needs electricity. And then you just fan it down on the foot brake, and the pressure drop to 65, 60 psi range, at which point buzzer red light would come on. And now, guys, you might be asked a question like, why did you release spring brakes while performing a fan down 1? The same with fan down 2, by the way. The answer I put in the book. Because fanning down with spring brakes applied will cause or may cause the damage to the system. And lots of people who get to the engine on test get scared. For example, the old truck drivers that were never properly trained. To this day, you have people driving for 30 years, and you know that they never, when you start driving, right? When you build the pressure to 100, 125, put in the first gear, they never apply the foot brake before releasing spring brakes, which you fail on the spot like this with a DMV. because they are afraid, oh my God, how can I apply the foot brake if both other systems are applied, right? Parking and emergency, spring. Oh my God, I'll damage the system. No, you won't, dummy. You would have to actually fan down really vigorously for a while to damage. Imagine if you have a balloon full of air. What happens if you do this? Nothing. But if you do this, eventually it will burst. The same concept here. But anyway, so now we transition to the fan down one. Now you hear the buzzer, right? Okay, and pay attention though, because what about if they tell you, like I like to, do that too sometimes. Let's say we perform like static or apply, and then I say transition, you start to fan down one, fan down two. Pay attention. If let's say I told you to transition from static to fan down two, and you turn the ignition to on position, I fail you on the spot, because you are not using your brains. If you transition from static or apply to fan down two, there's no need for you to turn ignition. Fan down two is mechanism. We are testing mechanism. It's not electrical. Mechanism is responsible for applying spring brakes. So you would just keep fanning down, right? But anyhow, in this case, we just perform fan down one. Lower pressure warning device test known as electrical. We hear that buzzer. Can you hear? Yes. And also we see the red light. So now you have to ask the person, sir, ma'am, do you want me to shut that buzzer off or leave it on? And right away tell them, it does not affect fan down two in any way, shape, or form. I can perform fan down two with the buzzer on. I can perform with the buzzer on. Doesn't matter. And they will tell you what to do. Me personally, it's annoying. I would turn the ignition to off position just to shut that buzzer off. And I would keep fanning down on the foot brake until the pressure drops to 45 millimeters, which point the spring brake pops out, and then keep fanning down foot brake some more till the pressure drops to 20 psi, at which point the tractor parking spring brake pops out. Notice that the trailer merge spring brake has to be popping out ahead of the tractor parking spring brake. Wow, because if it happened in reverse, when the tractor parking spring brake pops out ahead of the trailer merge spring brake, you would jackknife. Only can happen while driving. Now, had you been asked to secure the vehicle, just because those spring brakes pop out, so what? Ensure, in this case you don't apply that, they already popped out, hopefully. But you just ensure that the tractor parking trailer merge spring brakes are applied, switches down, and that's it. But that's how simple it can be. Now let's talk about slack adjuster. Slack adjuster, I'll just talk about it. Again, like initially, when I started going over the book, I talk about how to check brakes for conditions, remember? And what did I say? Every time you work underneath the vehicle, you have to say, park on the level ground, or I want to ensure that I'm parking on level ground, make sure tractor parking, trailer merge spring brakes apply, switches down, track neutral, you grab your keys, go outside, chuck the wheels. That's exactly what I would do, because slack adjuster test is the only brake test that requires you to leave the safety of the cabin in order to perform it. And then after coming back inside of my truck, I would still double check that the tractor parking trailer merge spring brakes were applied, switch was down, and truck was in neutral. Then I would depress the clutch, start the engine, wait for the pressure to be built to 100-125 psi. After which I would what? Secure the vehicle in the first gear. It's still engine off test. So secure the first gear, shut the engine off, release the clutch. Afterwards, the truck is secured by the first gear so I can safely release the tractor parking trailer merge spring brakes. I will stop here for a second. This is slack adjuster test. Am I going to hear the hissing noise or no? Yes. The truck does not have a brain. It's a dead object for those people that don't understand. The truck seriously is dead. It's not a real, like a person doesn't have a brain. So guys, it doesn't know which test we are performing. It always does the same thing. So yes, there will be hissing noise, sure. Do you give a shit about it? No. The pressure is stabilizing 10-15 seconds. If you were to look at their pressure gauges here, they will be moving. Eventually they will stop, right? Why do you care about it? You are performing slack adjuster test. So when you release spring brakes, just because there are many things happening, you don't have to mention them. During early static and apply, yes, you have to mention those pressure stabilizing. Otherwise, you'll fail the test because you'll get a false positive. In this case, as a slack adjuster test, the only thing you mention after releasing spring brakes is, hey, push rod goes inside of the brake chamber. You grab your keys, you go outside, you mark that push rod, you pull on the slack adjuster like an archer. You want to make sure you won't have more than 1 inch of movement. If you do, you have to adjust it with the wrench clockwise till you feel resistance, half a turn counterclockwise, and you are done. You adjust one, you have to adjust them all, 2 per axle, that good stuff. Why, if you adjust one, you have to adjust them all? because friction, which is braking power, has to be even by all the wheels. You have to have even friction. And then guys, also, I like to ask you, hey, more movement, is it more friction or less friction? Think logically. The definition of this test I already told you is to ensure that there's a proper friction between brake shoe lining and brake drum. Okay. And then you say, I cannot have more than 1 inch of movement. Why you freak out then? If you don't know the answer. You freak out because you know that if you have more movement, you'll have less friction between brake shoe lining and brake drum. That's why you freak out. You don't want to have more than 1 inch of movement because otherwise you might have a problem stopping the vehicle. And that's how the vehicle is stopped. The friction between brake shoe lining and brake drum slows down and stops the vehicle eventually. Anyhow, so when you're done, you grab your keys. Well, you actually obviously keys you always take with you, but I'm talking about the chocks as well. We don't have to say it to me, but in real life you would stash your chocks wherever you took them from, and that's it. Go inside, and again, if someone asks you to secure the vehicle, make sure tractor parking, trailer match spring wheels apply, switches down, shock neutral, very simple. Anyhow, so now let's cover the engine on test. Engine on test, I guess I will show you, you are visual creatures, so I want you to see those transitions, but it's very simple. Just before we go there, you have to understand again, to recap, engine on tests are designed to test brakes themselves. Service and spring brakes, Instructor has one, of each a piece, the same with trailer, so one service, one spring. Service brakes we test how? You have to drive and you have to see if they can stop the moving vehicle. Spring brakes is all the opposite. You just apply them first and you ease off the clutch to friction point. You want to see if that spring brake is going to prevent the vehicle from moving forward. So beginning is always the same. Make sure tractor parking, trailer match spring brakes apply, switches down, shock is in neutral, depress the clutch, start the engine, wait for the pressure to build to 125 psi. Put in the first gear. You notice put, secure right. The first gear is not going to be securing me from anything. So I say put in the first gear. Now, you know what? If you want to test spring brakes, it's simple, they already applied. So make sure, let's say someone tells you, test the trailer match spring brake. Okay, make sure the trailer match spring brake is applied. Release the tractor parking spring brake, ease off the clutch to friction point. Should not move. That's how simple it is. If you want to, right now, transition between the two, always apply first before releasing anything. So you would apply tractor parking spring brake, up to 2 seconds, takes for the brake to apply it. So release the trailer match spring brake, ease off the clutch to friction point, shake should not move, release the clutch fully. That's how simple it is. Now, if you want to drive, okay, you know that in order to drive you have to release spring brakes, but you know what? What overriding factor in your head should be, is the thinking that, hey, am I in control of the truck if I release spring brakes? No, I'm not. Okay, so apply the foot brake, yes. Now it's safe to release. In this particular case, only tractor parking spring brake applies, so I'll release it. I'll double check that trailer merge spring brake is released as well. Ease off the clutch to friction point. If you feel like the truck wants to go, come off the pedals at the same time. If you want to accelerate, that's fine. Drive for 10 to 15 feet, depress the clutch. I'll apply the handbrake. That's the handbrake, which is a trailer service brake. While applying the handbrake, I look in the side view mirrors. I'm observing the trailer, make sure it's not pulling left or right. Also should stop right away. If that's not the case, could indicate a problem with shifted load, improper tire pressure, brakes, or suspension. Now guys, whatever you were asked to do to transition from handbrake test, my left hand, or your left hand, is on the steering wheel, right is applying the Johnson bar, which is the handbrake, or you call it also trolley bar or trailer service brake. The point is both hands are busy. So whatever you're asked to do, first you apply the foot brake, then the handbrake. So you free up your right hand. In this case, I want to see you show you a couple transitions. First of all, so you have a transition from every possible way. So we already did spring brake test. We tested them both. Then we transitioned to between the two, then we went to handbrake test, and now let's say we want to go back to foot brake test. What do we do? And I'll perform this in a second, but you would ease off the clutch because you're already ready to drive. The clutch is depressed, foot brake is applied, so you ease off the clutch to friction point. Right when you feel the truck wants to go, both feet would come off the pedals and would drive. I won't go there yet, but I just want to tell you what you would do. Right now I want to transition to one of the spring brake tests. Let's say tractor parking spring brake. So again, remember, after finishing handbrake test, both hands were occupied. I would apply the foot brake, release the handbrake, then I would apply the tractor parking spring brake. Psst, wait a couple seconds till it applies itself, and then I have to take my foot off the foot brake. I cannot have two brakes applied. Not that it would damage the system, but it simply would be stupid. How can I know that my spring brake works properly if I have the foot brake applied? So now I ease off the clutch through friction. Shake, should not move. Okay, I just tested the tractor parking spring brake works properly. And again, let's say I were to test the other one. I would just apply the other one. After applying foot brake, releasing handbrake, I would apply trailer merge spring brake, for example, if someone asked me to test that one. Had someone ask me to secure the vehicle, I would apply the foot brake, release the handbrake, apply tractor parking, trailer merge spring brakes, and then wait 2 seconds like you always do when you apply the spring brakes, and take my foot off the foot brake, switch down, shock neutral, shut the engine off, release the clutch. So those are the really, I think pretty simple things. But now I promised to, test the foot brake, so let's do it. So let's go back to that situation when I just finished testing handbrake. So again, my left hand is on the steering wheel, my right hand is applying the handbrake. I apply the foot brake, handbrake, ease off the clutch to friction. I feel the truck wants to go more. The pedals again, I'm driving for 10 to 15 feet. Depress the clutch, apply the foot brake. While applying the foot brake, I look at the front end of my tractor, make sure it's not pulling left and right, and also stops right away. Now, if that's not the case, could indicate a problem with string system, improper tire pressure, brake suspension. Notice that 3 out of 4 potential problems for both service brake tests are the same: improper tire pressure, brakes, or suspension. For the foot brake, the 4th potential problem would be string system problem. Again, it's a string axle. For the handbrake would be shifted load, because if the load shifts in the cargo area, it's going to affect pulling to left or right. And again, if you want to secure the vehicle, apply the tractor parking, trailer merge spring brakes, wait up to 2 seconds, take your foot off the foot brake, switch down, neutral, shut the engine off, release the clutch. And then a couple things, and then we're done with the lecture about this switch. The splitter is called splitter or T-bar. And upshifting, downshifting, just the basic, guys, basics. First of all, what's that switch? We always say switch down, shock neutral, right? Well, it's a splitter. Again, is the most common name, splitter, but for some reason, for DMV it's enough when you say switch, so that's why we teach you switch down, switch up, blah, blah, blah. You have the most common transmission in the United States of America is 10-speed manual transmission. Not automatic, it's actually 10-speed manual. You'll be tested on those by DMV. We own those, obviously. This little toy here is 10-speed manual. How do you access all those gears? Kind of manner, right? 10 forward gears. Well, you only have 5 forward positions, and again, in your books, like I think second to last page or last, you actually have the layout there, the same one sticker here, so you already know the layout. Where's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now, how do you go to 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 if you only have 5 forward positions? Well, guess what? When you go to the 5th gear, you flip the switch up. Yes, in the 5th, not in the neutral from 5th to 6th, in the 5th. And then when you accelerate, obviously, because in order to go to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you have to actually keep going faster and faster. So after flipping that switch up, what do? You keep doing what you're supposed to do when you accelerate, which is accelerate, right? When you're upshifting. And then you clutch, neutral, clutch, you go to the 1st position. But because switch is up, the 1st position is not animal 1st gear, is 6th gear. Because you have 2 layers of 5, high gears and low gears. Low gears are 1 through 5, high gears are 6 to 10. So you are in 6. And then, accelerate again, clutch, neutral, clutch, 7th, which is the 2nd position, 2 plus 5, 7, and so forth. When you are, doesn't matter which gear, but high range. Let's say you are in 7th gear and you want to slow down. Okay, what do you do when you want to slow down? Apply the foot brake. I think that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you can just take your foot off the accelerator pedal and let the engine, it's called engine braking, that will be the best. You don't abuse the foot brake, but I'm talking about emergency braking, more of a fast braking. You would apply that foot brake, slow down to the speed, and I'll talk about the speeds in a second. because there are certain speeds in each gear. There's a maximum speed you can drive, drive at. So now you brake, then clutch, neutral. Now because you were braking, your RPMs are very low. So now you have to rev it up in neutral. Rev it up to about 1600. Then you go clutch, and now you go to 6. Now you're downshifting. You already use your brains. You already know that if you have only 5 forward locations. So if you're in the 6th gear and you're slowing down, what is the next gear below 6? Is 5th, right? Or it could be 4th. You can skip the gears. On 3rd, you can go to the 1st, but obviously then you would have to almost stop, basically. But what I'm just saying is, you are going to have to flip that switch down in the 6th. Because again, switch up, you're only going to be 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. Switch down 1 through 5. So if you are going below 6, you know that you have to flip that switch down. So you flip that switch down, and then you do what you're supposed to do when you're slowing down, which is brake, and brake to a certain speed, and then clutch, neutral, you rev it up, clutch, you go to 5th or whatever, the lower gear that you choose to go to. And that's how simple double clutching is. That's how that switch operates, guys. And now let's talk about the speeds. And that'll be easy to remember. In, for example, 5th gear, so the first few gears you won't even be looking at speedometer. You always go by the sound anyway. In the future you will learn to go by the sound. You'll never pay attention to speed. But just so you understand, in the 5th gear, the maximum speed you can drive is about 12 miles per hour. Now in a 6th, so now you're in high range, it's easy to count in those high ranges because 6th gear 15, 1 plus 5 is 6. In 7th gear max you can drive 25, 2 plus 5 is 7. In 8th gear 35, 3 plus 5 is 8. In 9th 45, 4 plus 5 is 9. And then in 10th you can drive as fast as you are allowed by your company or by the regulations, the highway regulations, the speed limits. But anyhow, that's how simple it is. So thank you so much, guys. And I think we covered all the book. And study hard, and you should be fine. Let's go to other people that we have here scheduled. Again,